So hello, everyone. Welcome to Ask the Grant Writing Expert. I'm Dr. Meg Bouvier. You know me as the creator of your library of NIH grantsmanship courses. I have over 35 years of experience at NIH as an applicant, an intramural researcher, a staff writer, and now as a full-time NIH grant mentor. I have helped my clients land over $500 million in federal funding and counting. And I'm here to answer your questions about NIH grant writing. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. So those of you who are attending live, just a reminder that you are in listen-only mode. So feel free to start typing questions into the Q&A box. You'll see there's a Q&A box. You can start typing questions in now. I'll be taking questions throughout this session. I don't have a co-facilitator today, so you're just stuck with me. I'll be doing a bit of a mini tutorial. If you're watching this as a recording, just a reminder that it is June 28th, 2023, and everything we talk about today is true to the best of my knowledge today. So always check to make sure that the information that you're getting about NIH from me or anybody else is true today, because things definitely change quickly at NIH. In terms of what you should be watching in the library right now, if you are targeting, it's late June, so some of you are probably putting the finishing touches on resubmissions. If you still need advice on resubmissions, there is a master resubmissions course in the library. I suspect that many of you are actually gearing up to write a cycle 3 application. Those deadlines are October, November. If that's the case, you probably want to begin to watch the preparation parts of your writing course. If you're a K applicant, know that on July 1st, so in just a couple of days, we will be releasing a newly updated version of our Master the K course. So if you're writing a K application, hang tight. Just don't start until July 1 because you're going to have a brand new hot off the presses version of that coming in July 1. I also, in July, I will be updating Master the T32 if any of you are looking to do institutional training grants. Hopefully that will be released by the end of the summer. We're always held up by the CME process. The Massachusetts Medical Society has to approve all of our updates. Okay, so let's talk about today's mini tutorial, and I'm going to do a screen share. And I see people are still joining. Just to let people know, feel free to start typing questions in to the question box. So you should be seeing my desktop that has competing, continuation, renewal awards. You'll notice that the recommendation from NIH is to get in touch with your program officer about 12 to 18 months before the deadline. And I'm actually just going to drop this URL in the chat also. Before I forget. Okay, so that should be in the chat now. So very long lead time here if you're looking at a continuing, a competing renewal. So there are two possible scenarios for timing the submission of a competing renewal. And what they say is that some investigators like to submit toward the end of their project period so that there's no gap in funding. And others will submit after the grant period has ended and they ask for a no-cost extension on their grant period, typically to get publications out and to finish up the work before they put in the competing renewal. The reason for this is that the conventional wisdom is that the best indicator of success on a future grant is success on a past grant. So you have to knock it out of the park if you hope to get another RO1. So I don't care if you're applying for your second RO1 or your 25th RO1. If you were not successful on the previous funding period, man, you're going to have an uphill struggle getting funding. In my experience, very few applicants actually apply toward the end of their funding period so that there's no gap in funding. I think it's much more common for people to go on a no-cost extension, try to crank out all the papers they can, and then put the competing renewal in after those papers are in press. That's my experience with that. So the next thing I want to show you when it comes to competing renewals is this document, which is just a very simple table that I like to show people. If you're writing a competing renewal, you're meant to put a progress report, typically positioned at the beginning of your approach section. So this is where you demonstrate success on a past grant. So what is the operational definition of success? It's publications, of course. So it can be really nice to have this kind of a progress report where you list out the aims from the previous grant, to say what the progress is, and then list the publications. This format works really well if you have a lot to brag about and you've got a lot of publications, because you want to be able to show that you've published off of each aim. If you show something like this, at a glance, reviewers will see that for each aim, you made progress and you published off it. If you have a high impact journal, list the title of the journal, because you want to make sure that they don't miss it. So, you don't have to do it with every single one necessarily, but certainly if it's something, like I was in neurobiology, and a high impact journal in our field would be J Neuroscience. You would list that title to make sure that reviewers aren't missing the fact that that's where you published. So if any people have questions about competing renewals, please feel free to ask them. And if not, I'm going to go on to another topic that I kind of wanted to throw at you guys to see what you said. So hold on one second. Okay. And I see that a bunch of people have continued to join. Feel free to put questions in the Q&A box while I'm giving this information. Let's see. Okay, so I think you're seeing this now. Hopefully you're seeing the frequently asked questions here for NIH. So I had a curious experience yesterday where a library member emailed me to ask a question. She's working on her biosketch, and she was referred to this page about frequently asked questions about biosketches. NIH has these pages for a lot of different grant parts. And so she was asking about this one here, the biosketch. So she submitted her biosketch to her pre-award support office. And in part B, where it asks for the positions, she listed all her positions in reverse chronological order. And anybody who has served as a reviewer or a grant editor of any kind knows that that's how everybody's done it since the dawn of time. And her pre-award support office came back and said, only list your current positions, not the past positions. And they referred her to this FAQ. And in fact, it does say the biosketch instructions state that all positions and scientific appointments must be provided. Does this refer to active positions and appointments, or all positions a researcher has ever held? And the answer is the biosketch must include all current positions and scientific appointments. Current positions and scientific appointments. What to make of this, right? So I am in a little bit of a quandary, because I had never heard this. This seems like a kind of, I don't know if this was a rule change or if this is one of those things that applicants just don't follow. So And it got me to thinking about the fact that what happens at NIH often doesn't follow the letter of the law in terms of NIH guidance or SF 424. So I think what I want to do is just talk about that in general, that because there were two instances of this week. So my advice to this applicant is going to be, when I send her, and she may be here actually, it might be that she to follow the letter of the law based on the FAQ, you would only list your current positions. However, I've never seen an NIH biosketch, and I've seen probably over 1,000 of them in my career. I've probably seen over 100 this year alone. I have never seen one that doesn't list past positions. And I can't imagine why you wouldn't want to do that unless you're somebody really senior and you're tight on space, because you're listing a lot of contributions, a lot of information in the contributions to science, or I don't know what. But I've never seen reviewers comment on mark an application down because they had concerns about the way the positions are listed in the biosketch. I don't think I've ever read a set of summary statements where reviewers have complained about how positions were listed in the biosketch. So to follow the rule precisely, you would only list current positions. But if I were an applicant, I would keep listing my past positions, because I just don't think the reviewers even know about that rule. And if they did know a bit about that rule, I'm not sure they care. I think it's helpful to have those positions. So, it's one of those things where it's kind of breaking the rules. It's not going to result in an error message when you upload to grants.gov. And I've never seen a reviewer comment negatively on listing past positions. So it isn't following the rules, but I would probably list the past positions. Another instance where this came up this week again was in marking changes on a resubmission application. So for those of you who have been around a while, you'll know that in days gone by, I think prior to like 2016 or something like that, you were obliged to mark changes on a resubmission application. So not just writing your one-page introduction, but actually marking the changes in the resubmission in whatever way. Sometimes people used colored font or italics, that kind of thing. Then in 2016, NIH issued a notice saying you're no longer required to mark the changes, but you can still do it if you want. And then a couple of years ago, they changed it again, saying you're not allowed to mark changes on a resubmission application. And they specifically say you can't use italics, bold, colored font, etc. So this applicant said, well, what about a line on the side in the margin that marks where where we changed the text in the A1? Technically, that's not in the list of things that they say you can't do, but they also say it's not, and it's actually in SF 424 that you're not allowed to mark the changes. So technically, that's not one of the things they say you're not allowed to do. So should you do it? I mean, this applicant reported that he had senior members on his team who do submit applications where they put the colored line in the margin. I guess my question would be, have they done that recently? Because I sometimes find that my younger applicants are getting advice from mid-level and senior people who haven't submitted in 7 to 10 years. And like, NIH is a completely different beast than it was 7 to 10 years ago. But if you know somebody who has done that in the last year or two, I know that it doesn't yield an error message when you upload to grants.gov. And again, I don't remember ever seeing a reviewer complain that you marked the changes on the resubmission in the last couple of years. And I know that some people have done that. So this is another instance where technically you're not supposed to do it, but people do it, and I'm not always convinced that reviewers are fully aware of all the rules and regulations at NIH. And certainly, I don't think you're risking being disqualified if you do something like put a red bar in the margin to mark change text on an A1, or you're certainly not going to be disqualified for listing your previous positions on a biosketch. That's not going to happen. What you might be disqualified for is putting a URL in page limited sections of an NIH application, with the exception of the biosketch. That's the one place where you can have a URL. But that's seen as circumventing the page limits. And I see people do that periodically, and NIH has said they're going to really start cracking down on that and disqualifying applicants for doing that. They said that, I want to say, like 6 months ago. I think it was last December when they came out with that statement. So anyway, so that is what I have for my tutorial. So, and I see more people have joined. Welcome. For the people who have joined, feel free to put questions in the chat box. I'm going to talk a little bit while people are typing questions in the chat box. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the questions I have gotten put questions in the Q&A box. Questions that I've gotten from applicants during the course of the last 2 weeks. I actually had a meeting with somebody earlier today. This was kind of an interesting, two other things related to ESI. And I know I talk about ESI all the time, and you guys are probably sick to death of hearing me talk about ESI, but early stage investigator status is for people who are 10 years or less from their terminal degree and have not served as a PI on an RO1 or equivalent. So a couple of things related to that. It confers a huge funding advantage, at least 5 percentage points at most institutes, and sometimes more. It can go up to like 10 percentage points. So it's a huge funding advantage. So I did have somebody who applied for an extension 12 days ago and already has it approved. So the approvals seem to be going through pretty quickly right now. So if you're toying with whether or not to apply and your expiration is looming, apply for the extension. And NIH has been very generous with giving extensions to your ESI status due to COVID-related research interruptions, which virtually everybody has had. So if you document, you apply for the extension yourself. Your pre-award support office doesn't do that. It's very easy to do. Just do a Google search to look up where the application is to apply. The key is that you have to somehow quantify for NIH how much time to put back on your clock. So you have to talk about how many months you were closed, or how delayed you were in getting reagents, or if you had research animals colonies that died during the pandemic. So what was the period of time? And then write that up as a letter and send it to somebody who can sign off on that documentation, like a department chair or administrator. But draft the letter for them, so all they have to do is put it on letterhead and sign it and send it back to you. And then you upload that with your application. And they've been really generous about giving those extensions. One of the reasons why it's so important to get an extension is that if you submit an A0, a new submission, right before your ESI extension expires, your A1, your resubmission, will be reviewed as ESI as long as you submit within 13 months. And in fact, there are certain institutes that will honor that policy up to 37 months. So that would mean essentially buying 3 more years to land your ESI. Okay, so we have a question. I'm an ESI and recently met with a program officer to discuss a grant that hovered in scope between an R21 and an R01. She encouraged me to up the scope so that I could be considered for an R01 with my ESI status. That's very good advice. Perhaps a modular R01. Could you talk about any strategies and submission, et cetera, that would be specific to a modular R01? So modular has to do with the budget. And in general, I don't work on budgets, but I can tell you that in general, well, I shouldn't say this because I've heard it both ways. I think the conventional wisdom is that a first RO1, you're better off going in with a modular budget anyway. I have heard people say otherwise, but I think most mid-level and senior people suggest that their applicants go in, their first time RO1 applicants go in with a modular RO1 budget. I agree with what this person is saying, and what I do feel qualified to address is how to deal with the scope of the project. And I guess in a way the budget too, because if you're hovering in scope between an R21 and an RO1, what you could do is propose a smaller RO1. Remember that the RO1 is up to 5 years and up to 500,000 directs per year. That doesn't mean that you have to propose a 5-year RO1. You could propose something shorter. It could be a 3 or 4-year RO1. And reduce the budget and the scope accordingly. And that way you're kind of squeaking in this RO1 while you have this A0 while you have ESI status, and then buying that 13-month window to gather preliminary data. I would further suggest that as you're submitting that, because I'm sensing that if you're hovering between an R21 and an RO1, it's not just the scope, but the amount of preliminary data and publications that's lower for you. Because, you know, the saying is that reviewers have an insatiable appetite for preliminary data and publications for RO1 applicants. You need a ton to be competitive at the RO1 level. The other thing you can do is take your RO1 aims, and at the same time that you're submitting the RO1, break off an aim and submit it to a private foundation if at all possible, so that if your RO1 isn't funded, maybe you've been able to get your hands on some private foundation money to work on aim 1 while you work on the resubmission of the RO1. And that would make you more competitive as you go in for the resubmission. So I'm really a big fan of this kind of shotgunning approach. You cannot have the same science and review at NIH at 2 different places at the same time, but you absolutely can have the same science and review at NIH and multiple private foundations and even another federal agency. You can do that simultaneously. And if more than one gets funded, may you be so lucky that you can work out with the program officers how to deal with that. So I would add that to the strategy. In terms of the budget and this modular budget, I would talk to your pre-award support people, but I would probably not propose a 5-year RO1. I'd probably go with a 3 or 4. So follow-up question from the same person. As I strategize, I'm wondering if I should submit an R21 with it as written for the October 5th cycle, and then increase the scope and submit that as a February RO1 submission. I really appreciate the advice to submit a smaller RO1. Thank you for that idea. So it wouldn't, first off, if it's an R21, it wouldn't be October 5th, it would be mid-October. I think it's the 16th for an R21. But I guess my question for you, Marlene, is what is your ESI expiration? Because and do you have any other projects that you could potentially put in as an RO1? Because the goal is always to get as many RO1 submissions in under your ESI status as possible. And so your ESI expired December 2015. I think you mean 2025, right? Yep, 2025. Okay, so you could wait till February. You could even wait till June if you wanted to really kind of beef this up. Or you could put it in as, I mean, you couldn't put this in. I think what you're asking is, could I put this in as an R21 in October, and then submit the RO1 in February? And the answer is no, because then you would have the same science and review at 2 different mechanisms at the same time. What you could do is put it in as an R21 in October 2023, wait until you get the reviews back from that, which would likely be, you'd probably know the score by like March or April, and you may be able to squeak off, like if you've got the summary statements back on that, you probably could put in an RO1 for June 2024, and that would still keep you under the within your ESI expiration. So that's a possibility. I also want to mention that for so the R21 is a 2-year award. It's generally capped at 275,000 directs per year. I'm sorry, across the 2 years total. So 275 directs total. Technically, some of the mechanisms allow you to do a clinical trial, but some don't, and it can also be extraordinarily difficult to do a clinical trial on such a small budget. So for any of you who are considering this kind of like, gee, is there a small format R that I could apply to, because I've got a number of years left on my ESI, how can I get a little money to beef up my preliminary data and publications to be competitive at the RO1 level? For those of you who are doing trials, consider an R34, which is typically used as a clinical trial planning grant. That's a 3-year award, and the directs are capped typically somewhere between 300 and 600,000 over the 3 years. So it gives you a little more money to do like an early phase clinical trial. So in Marlene's instance, I'm assuming that she's not doing a clinical trial and is looking at the 2-year R21 as something to build up her data and publications to help her to go in and be more competitive. Let's say she lands that October 16th R21. She would find out about that the following spring, like late spring. Her project start date would be in the summer of 2023. And she'd be like 1.5 years into that, and would have data and publications to be more competitive to put in her A0 while she still has ESI status. If she were doing a clinical trial, she would use the same strategy, but she'd probably use an R34 as a clinical trial planning grant to beef up her application, her data and publications to be more competitive at the RO1 level. So Marlene, I hope that that was helpful in terms of answering that question. Going back to the ESI question, there was something else that I was going to cover, and we have 2 more minutes. So if anybody else has another question they want to cover, instead of me searching my brain to remember what the other issue was for ESI that I was going to talk about, feel free to put that in there. Oh, I know what it was. The person I was speaking to right before this meeting is her ESI expiration is coming up, and she's in a bit of a quandary because her ESI expiration is this October. And by rights, what I would do is advise her to submit to the parent RO1 or equivalent. And then if she doesn't get funded on that 13 months later, as long as she submits within 13 months of the A0, she would still be an ESI on the resubmission, all well and good. Except there's an RFA that perfectly fits her very odd niche area of research. And RFAs don't allow resubmissions. So that would mean she's now down to 1 chance at landing her RO1 if she goes for this perfect RFA. And not only that, but the RFA they're only awarding something like 4 or 5 applications. So I don't know what the advice is here. In this situation, I asked her to discuss it with her program officer because she has to weigh. I mean, this RFA is such a perfect fit that part of the description actually directly quotes from one of her recent manuscripts. That's how tailor-made this thing is for her. And typically you would advise somebody to go in under the mechanism, the NOFO that is topic specific instead of the parent. But if she does that, she reduces herself to one shot at an RO1 with the ESI status, as opposed to going in under the parent announcement and having two. So I did not know what to advise her on that one. So we'll see what the program officer says, and I'll get back to you. So I'm always curious about these strange situations. And even after all these years doing this work, I still come up with things where I just kind of scratch my head and have to think about it. So anyway, that is it for our time. So thank you all for attending. I'm just going to quickly look and see. It looks like our next session is tips for writing an R34. So you are with me again on that one. So there won't be a guest for that. So I guess it's timely that I talked about the R34. So that's a clinical trial planning grant, again, a 3-year award meant to beef up your RO1 clinical trials. I'll be talking about tips and strategies for that next time if people are interested. So anyway, thank you all for attending, and good luck with your grant applications. And I will see you next time. Have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.